nightmarish real-life experiences, anything but fake bones, and moments when actors weren't really doing much acting at all, are just a few examples of the alarming truths that make these horror scenes right here even scarier to watch. So with that in mind, I am Gareth, this is What Culture Horror, and here are 10 more horror movie moments more terrifying when you know the truth. Number 10. Romanian Ghosts were watching the monitors with the director during the corridor scene, The Nun. Some would argue that it's never really a good time to experience your first ever supernatural interaction. But in the middle of shooting a rather creepy flick about a demon nun? Poor Corin Hadey. The director of that 2018 The Conjuring 2 spin-off known as The Nun eventually explained all of this when speaking to Yahoo Movies UK, noting how things got particularly freaky when shooting the spooky corridor of crosses scene. Said sequence sees Thaisa Farmiga's sister Irene wandering down a corridor boasting many a crucifix in the catacombs found underneath a Romanian convent. Sure enough, she eventually bumps into the titular nun, aka the demon Valak, and things go sideways fast. And the situation Hardy actually found himself in whilst filming this moment only makes this nun encounter even more unsettling. The director revealed that he found himself in a dark cell room next to the aforementioned corridor, seemingly joined by a number of Romanian crew members sitting down and watching. Thinking nothing of it, he returned to his monitors. But when he turned back around to said crew members after getting the take off Farmiga that he wanted, he was shocked to find that no one was there. The room didn't have any other exits other than the door in front of him, so Hardy just assumed he'd been chilling with the ghosts of some Romanian soldiers who were once walking around the fortress they were shooting in. So there you have it. As Irene was being haunted by a demon in this scene, Hardy was seemingly being haunted by some troops. Number 9. Dawn Jeffrey Nelson's death scene almost traumatized her in real life. Tourist Trap. David Schmoller's 1979 horror movie Tourist Trap focuses on a group of youngsters who decide to check out a roadside museum, one owned by a dude called Mr. Slauson, who we eventually learn is fond of throwing on a mask and rubbing plaster on people's faces. PG fun all round. But the shooting of that scary moment in particular becomes that little more disturbing once you learn of the very real terror actor Dawn Jeffrey Nelson experienced while filming her notable plastered death scene. Confessing that the darned role almost traumatized me, Jeffrey Nelson, who plays Tina in the film, would tell Entertainment Weekly that she legitimately couldn't get off the table she was tied to with things like ropes and handcuffs. That would already be enough to leave the average person feeling a bit freaked out. But this was merely the beginning, folks. From here, due to so many mannequins being present in this museum set, the crew would often forget that she was a real person. She was leaned on and even left on set at one point when the crew rushed off to lunch. Charming. Jeffrey Nelson did see the funny side at least, and would also reveal that the plaster being used on her was actually just mashed potato or whipped cream. Sounds quite nice. But still, knowing that the actor was very much restricted on set and genuinely felt extremely vulnerable while filming the moment Mr. Slauson smothered/scared her character to death, definitely makes the scene that bit more of a distressing watch. Now do I have a quick question for you, baby. What do you think is the best death scene in a horror movie that you've ever seen? I want you to take that answer right now and just throw it in the comment section down below and I'm gonna stare at it. Now back to the video. Number 8. That is a real skeleton. House on Haunted Hill. William Castle's House on Haunted Hill boasts a scene involving a skeleton rising out of a vat of acid. And in a few theaters back when it was first released, said moment was actually accompanied by a plastic skeleton that was rigged up to float around a cinema. 1959 was a fun time. It all seems quite silly, mostly because it is. But the truth behind the skeleton scene actually makes the sight of it creeping towards Carol Omart Annabelle Loren way scarier. You see, this skeleton being controlled by Vincent Price's Frederick Loren wasn't plastic like the ones used in theaters for the Immersio gimmick. Nope, this one right here was the real deal. Craig Reardon, who worked as the special effects and makeup supervisor on Poltergeist, another movie that contains its own real skeletons, noted this during the Cursed Film Show's episode on that film. He explained when discussing his annoyance at the fact many feel the Poltergeist movie was cursed because of the use of real human skeletons, that House on Haunted Hill had done that very same thing years earlier. This was simply because it was cheaper than having a prop one made. And just like that, a quite goofy scene from the 50s suddenly feels a whole lot more frightening. That is a real skeleton. Number 7. Leatherface's scream is genuine when accidentally sawing his own leg. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Few will ever forget the iconic closing stages of Tobe Hooper's horror classic The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, as Gunnar Hansen's Leatherface and Edwin Neal's hitchhiker chase down Marilyn burns Sally Hardesty, things get incredibly intense. Firstly, the hitchhiker is run down by a truck, and then the bloke driving the vehicle manages to keep Leatherface away from himself and Sally by launching a wrench at his noggin. And it's right here when the horrifying sight of the masked pursuer's weapon of choice accidentally soaring into his own leg left many an audience member wincing. What makes this moment even more shocking, though, is the fact that it was later said that the late Hansen wasn't required to do that much acting here. You see, while he didn't actually cut into his own leg, thankfully, he did connect with the metal plate covered by a blood bag, and the heat caused by this friction led to him actually really burning his leg here, with Hansen genuinely fearing he'd made contact with his own flesh for a second. Sure, he may not have suffered a full-on chainsaw incision, but knowing that Hansen was genuinely in pain and fearing the worst whilst the cameras were rolling definitely adds a layer of authentic terror to this beat. Number 6, Rachel Weisz wasn't acting in that bathtub. Constantine. Rachel Weisz went through quite the ordeal in a bathtub for Francis Lawrence's superhero horror picture Constantine. There's a moment in the movie when Angela Dodson reawakens her powers by going through a near-death experience. Said experience? Nearly drowning to death in a tub. The scene required Keanu Reeves to actually submerge his co-star, with the scene only getting more and more intense and disturbing as Constantine continues to refuse to let her out of the water. Now, it is worth noting that Weisz and Reeves did have a signal for when things were going a bit too far, the former tapping the latter on the arm 3 times. And if that was a bit tough to spot amidst all that flailing and chaos, Weisz would also tell Tribute that the pair were very much in tune, and that she knew Reeves would sense when it was time to pull her out. But that doesn't change the fact that she also admitted in that same interview that the whole thing was really scary, before adding, "Keanu was holding me down by the neck, I was thrashing about in the bath, and I guess there's a moment where you're not acting anymore. You're thinking, I really gotta get out of this bath, otherwise I'm gonna die." Weisz may have fully trusted Reeves here, but it's still hard to rewatch this scene now without feeling any additional dread at the thought of the actor genuinely fearing for her life underwater, even if only for a moment. Cheers for watching this video today, my friend, and if you're enjoying what you're watching, then hit that subscribe button down below for more of this What Culture horror stuff in your life. Number 5, that birth scene was so traumatizing, Noomi Rapace was tormented by disturbing nightmares. Prometheus. While the sight of a baby xenomorph breaking out of John Hurt's chest in the original space set horror is easily the most iconic scene in the Alien franchise's history, there's a moment in Prometheus that definitely rivals that when it comes to terrifying imagery. This sequence involves Noomi Rapace's Elizabeth Shaw having to go through an emergency C-section to remove her own little alien nasty from her abdomen, and it turns out that fans weren't the only ones haunted by this gory scene. Rapace herself would eventually reveal that the moment a squid alien was yanked out of her character's belly ultimately led to her being tormented in her dreams. There were 2 specific dreams which stuck with the actor, one involving her seeing black veins spread all across her body, while the other had her thinking a creature was moving around inside her. That latter dream even left Rapace crying her eyes out for real when she woke up, the poor thing, and after feeling understandably shook up by all this, and explaining to her director Ridley Scott the next day how she felt the whole thing was getting into her head a bit, you know how he responded? "Great, okay, should we start?" Typical Ridley. Knowing that the actor in the middle of this make-believe procedure was actually experiencing her worst nightmares coming to life for 4 days while filming, only makes this sequence even more traumatizing when watching it back. Number 4, shooting the lawnmower scene left the cinematographer with a splinter in their eye, Maximum Overdrive. While he's obviously best known for writing some of the most iconic novels of all time, The Shining, Carrie, Misery, and Stand By Me author Stephen King also once sat in the directing chair many moons ago, and it was during the filming of his critically panned movie about machines coming to life and killing people known as Maximum Overdrive when things took a very real turn for the worse. There's a point in the movie when a young boy called Deke, played by Halter Graham, flees from an incoming lawnmower, one that's covered in blood naturally. But while Deke was able to escape this dangerous situation, the same could not be said for the film's director of photography Armando Nanuzzi. Now, it may not have looked all that dangerous, but the team moving the remote-controlled lawnmower lost control of it at one point, and it soon went crashing into some wood that was supporting the camera. Splinters shot out all over the place as its blades sliced through the wood, and one actually ended up landing right in the eye of Nanuzzi. Nanuzzi would actually go on to lose said eye because of the incident too. Not only does that shocking real-life event make this initially quite goofy chase feel a touch more frightening, knowing just how dangerous it actually was to shoot, it also led to Nanuzzi suing king for $18 million, though that suit would ultimately be settled outside of court. Still, scary lawnmower. Number 3, the knife had to be glued to the glove in one scene after a scary mishap. Scream 2022. Look, with Scream being a franchise centered around people being stabbed by individuals wearing a spooky mask, the odd prop mishap here and there is unfortunately inevitable. You've probably heard all about Skeet Ulrich being very much struck by the point of an umbrella during the first Scream, a moment that was excruciating due to it hitting a sensitive spot he was left with after open heart surgery. But an even worse incident almost occurred during the shooting of a moment in 2022 Scream. So in that film, there's a point when Melissa Barrera's Sam Carpenter has to fend off Ghostface at the hospital, dodging knife attacks and using a chair to stay alive, stay alive. There's a particularly frightening bit in the scene when the masked attackers start swinging their blade across a table as they try to slash up their next victim. But according to Barrera, this was an action that had to be altered mid-scene when things literally got out of hand while filming. The very real knife swapped in for the rubber one for closer shots apparently flew out of Ghostface's hands mid-take due to the gloves they were wearing being a bit slippy. It soared right by Barrera and hit the window behind her, but that was still enough to spook everyone on set. To ensure this didn't go down again, the knife was then glued to the glove from there on out. But you have to imagine that Barrera was still a touch nervous from that point on, right? And knowing that this was the real deal being swung at her here definitely makes viewing the scene a slightly more terrifying experience. Number 2, Robert Englund was told to legitimately terrify Moo Hughes during a chase. Wes Craven's new nightmare. Can you imagine turning up for work and suddenly having Robert Englund in full Freddy Krueger makeup jump out on you? Well, a young Moo Hughes didn't have to, as he lived that potentially traumatizing scenario on the set of Wes Craven's New Nightmare. You know that scene where Krueger is chasing after Hughes Dylan Porter in Freddy's dungeon? Well, if it wasn't already scary enough watching a young character flee from the terrifying spirit, it turns out that director Craven had a sneaky way to ensure Hughes' reactions would be as real as possible. As the kid ran away from Freddy, it was noted in the Never Sleep Again documentary that Craven had Englund hide behind a corner and jump out to legitimately frighten the life out of him. This mid-take scare got Craven the genuine reaction he was looking for, and the moment ended up in the finished film, with Hughes looking properly spooked as Englund really turns it up, as the latter actor put it. Hughes at least looks back on the moments fondly today, even regularly telling the story when making appearances at conventions. But that doesn't change the fact that the knowledge of a child being actually scared for real during this chase makes the scene infinitely creepier when revisiting it. And number 1, the first time Maker Monroe met Nicolas Cage, the cameras were rolling. Longlegs. Unquestionably one of the most unsettling movies to arrive in theaters over the last few years. Oz Perkins' Longlegs sees Maker Monroe's FBI agent Lee Harker trying to hunt down a particularly creepy serial killer who is behind the murders of numerous families. Said killer is brought to life by a Nicolas Cage at the peak of his powers. The two characters ultimately finally come face to face during an interrogation, and their subsequent conversation is one of the most disturbing scenes of the entire film. In an attempt to really ramp up the tension for that super important moment in the picture, Perkins opted to keep the actors apart throughout the shoot. Not only that, Monroe wasn't shown any images of Cage's character either. So when the cameras began to roll and Monroe walked into the room to see Longlegs sitting there, that was legitimately the first time the actor had ever laid eyes on this frightening human. The star has since admitted to Variety that she didn't even feel like she was in a room with Cage at all, feeling she'd instead really stepped into a world where the horrifying Longlegs existed. And learning that Monroe was going through the very real experience of being exposed to this monstrous human for the very first time here only adds to the feeling of dread that was already present without that knowledge.